So I'm John Sun, the co-founder and CEO at Spring Labs. My background really just started probably the same as many people in kind of the room here. It's much more on consumer credit. Prior to Spring Labs, I was the co-founder and chief risk officer at Avant. And prior to that, I had run credit risk for Innova. So really, Spring Labs is a data products, data security company designed with the user kind of in mind, because at the end of the day, that was really my background, is sitting in kind of the same spot that you guys are today, thinking about how to use technology and data to really enrich your businesses.
Awesome, thank you. And I want to get back to what the product does at Spring. But Marco, first, let's talk a little bit about what you do at TU.
Sounds good. So I don't think TransUnion needs introduction, but I'm a senior vice president at TransUnion, and currently I have P&L responsibility as well as strategy and market development responsibilities across numerous industries that include retail, e-commerce, technology, and some of the emerging ones like gaming, sports betting. I've been at TransUnion for about 7 years, spent some time on the financial services side doing strategy and consumer lending. But I started my career as an engineer, so I am a techie at heart, and data privacy, data protection, new technologies, something that interests me. So as I look at new technologies or new approaches to improve relationships with our clients or to improve internal relationships, I actually try to keep up and stay up to what is the latest when it comes to the latest technology. So.
Well, I think that's a good segue. Why don't we talk a little bit about how TransUnion, and you in particular, think about data privacy for the millions and millions of folks that you guys help with for obtaining credit and the like.
Yeah, certainly. So listen, data privacy, data security, it is at our core. It has to be, right? Considering the amount of data we have, we store, we transact with both our clients, partners, that is at our core. When you think about threats and how do you manage the data, how do you protect it, there's primary focus is you have to be religious. You have to be religious about your information security. You have to be religious about implementing policies, especially as your organization that's multinational, as you're growing through the multiple acquisitions. You want to make sure that you protect the data as any way possible, meaning make sure that all the vulnerabilities are patched. Make sure you create a proper segregation of data within your systems. Train your employees, social engineering. Make sure that your employees are aware of that, right? Insider threat. Insider threat is always a problem for any organization. That's harder to manage, but if you protect your data, if you segregate your data, if you assume sort of a zero trust, right? If you assume zero trust and you look at tokenization and encryption, you try to limit the risks. Risk is always going to be there. You just try to religiously limit it because that's the core. If you can't have that at core, you are not going to exist as a business.
And so zero trust for you guys means that potentially a rogue actor, a data breach could come from internal. Is that right?
Zero trust is really you treat your inside as if it's outside, right? So you have to have protections because your inside threat, a rogue employee could access the data, right? So do you have proper controls in place? Do you segregate data? Do you have the sensitive PI data only in specific areas that are accessible only to certain employees, right? And what often happens, especially large organizations that grow over time, you have data at different places that you do not monitor with the same kind of privacy constraints, right? With the same kind of security constraints. So you just got to make sure that you assume that there's the insider threat is as big as outsider threat.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I would imagine that even with best practices in times like M&A or big transactions or even maybe quarterly, like things just get harder and harder to enforce or do. And so even with the best of intentions, you could have something fall by the wayside.
That is true. It's inevitable, right? I mean, you have to be religious about it, but it's really hard. It's really hard as you grow, yes.
Awesome. John, I think this is a great segue now to talk about what Spring's been working on and how you guys think about data privacy over at Spring.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of the things that you said, Marco, really resonates with kind of how we've kind of designed our product. But at its core, really what Spring Labs does is we help organizations, enterprises, minimize the amount of sensitive data that they have internally using a process called tokenization. We invented this process called private vaultless tokenization. And the idea here, the goal is really, number one, definitely to reduce overall data security risk, but also number two, just give organizations more flexibility in how they can use their data without having to worry about data breaches. And ultimately, I think, what we want to get to the state of is you guys should be free to focus on discovering kind of new innovative uses of your data without having to worry about whether that data is going to kind of fall into the wrong hands and thus be able to kind of better serve your customers.
And before we move on, I would love a little bit more granular explanation, maybe like I'm a 5-year-old, of actually what you just said about tokenization, what that means.
Yeah, absolutely. So we all ingest a massive amount of sensitive consumer data, social security numbers and dates of birth and names and addresses. And basically that information kind of flows in our system, sits in our databases, and presents a persistent risk. Insider threat, external hacks, malware. So these things all act on the sensitive data that's within your systems. What tokenization as a concept does is we think about how do we eliminate that sensitive data from your systems by turning sensitive data into non-sensitive tokens in a way that doesn't interrupt your day-to-day operations. So that last part is key. Anyone can kind of just rip the sensitive data out of their databases. Now the question is, how do you keep doing the things that you do without additional complexity while still doing that? And I think that's where tokenization and more specifically kind of our private vaultless tokenization technology comes in.
And so just for example, using, if Spring was being used for securing my social security number, for instance, it wouldn't be sitting in a database as my numerical string, my social security number.
Yeah,
that's nonsense.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
And that's really kind of layering on top of the things that Marco had kind of said as securities best practices. We complement those things, not replace those things. So all of the things that Marco said we need to do more of. But I think in addition to that, we really want to help companies rethink how they manage their sensitive data risk. And the key to that is eliminating the sensitive data in their database to begin with. So to your point, Johnny, we wouldn't recommend that companies store your social security numbers in their database. We wouldn't recommend that they use your social security number as a record locator, which many companies do. We'd recommend they kind of substitute a token with still referential integrity. You can still link on it, you can still query on it, you can still use it as a record locator. But if ultimately that piece of data gets lost, you as a consumer are not harmed in that data breach.
Understood. And maybe, I guess what I'm interested to find out now is, because it seems like a no-brainer, but what are practically some of the difficulties with using tokenization? And maybe Marco, you could speak to like, I know that you guys have to provide a score very quickly, yep. Or there's all these different things that from a commercial standpoint might affect your business with leveraging something like tokenization.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And you said a few keywords. You talked about data minimization, right? And you look at, I gotta address that first. You're trying to minimize the amount of sensitive data you have. And you have to be intentional. If you're collecting it, there has to be a specific purpose. Why are you doing it? What is the specific use case? And then if you don't need it, make sure you don't have it. And that's a change of regulation, right? You go from the prevent harm, which is FCRA and GLBA, to GDPR, CCPA, which is more about be intentional, minimize the data. Now, when you have it, right, you can go and turn it into tokens. But if you can't do the same operations, if you can't link or match data, if we have a partner or client that's looking for us to append the data, how can I do that if I can't do it fast enough, right? So if I need to do real-time millisecond transactions and I have to go through the tokenization, detokenization process, I want to make sure I can do it very quickly. Or if I'm doing hundreds of millions of records, can I do it in a minimal amount of time? So that's an operational constraint, right? Another one is you look at the different tokenization or encryption technologies. There's a key, there's a secure key that I use, right, to encrypt it. Well, I will often, if I'm doing the right thing, I want to be able to rotate that key. Often you will see you rotate the key and you have to change all your tokens. That does not make sense. That makes it extremely difficult from the operational perspective. So being able to do something like that, where you don't have to change token, but you can consistently rotate the key to continue maintaining security, is extremely important. Those are considerations that go from when you have experimental encryption capabilities until you bring it in-house and try testing it. That's what you look into, because you have to satisfy some of the basic operational constraints.
Yeah, totally. And John, I'm curious to see if you have a response on that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything Marco just said is exactly right. I mean, a lot of times it's really about practically how does this implement into your systems in a way that's not invasive, not intrusive, that's fast enough for real-time use cases that you guys would use it for today, real-time decisioning, fetching customer records while they're on the phone with one of your customer service agents, et cetera. So all of that needs to happen at kind of sub-millisecond scale. And I think additionally, a lot of the security aspects that Marco had mentioned, how is the key actually stored, right? How can we make sure that there's no insider threat from access to that key? So those are some of the topics that, as you're looking into tokenization solutions, you should ask about and make sure that you're comfortable with the answers. And I think those are some of the aspects that we've kind of always tried to, from a first principles perspective, design our kind of product around.
Just one more. As you were talking, John, that's excellent. Also, when you build these tokens, right, there's a token for Marko Ivanov, but what if you have multiple partners or clients and they don't want to use the same token? Can you actually create multiple different tokens for the same person, right, and exchange with different clients? Like, these are some basic considerations you have to have if you want it to work. And that was, yeah.
Is there any potential threat or risk of losing data if you lose keys, for instance? And how might you mitigate that?
Well, it's a problem if you lose a key, right? I think the bigger threat is, and I think, John, you just mentioned it, if you have a key that's easily accessible through social engineering, right? Employee gives it away, admin password, and somebody gets access to the key. Or if you have a rogue employee that goes and gets access to the key. So what kind of key are we talking about? Where is it stored? Is it stored in one location? Is it a key that's in multiple different locations that you need to get to at the same time? Like, these are important considerations that actually improve security, right? But losing a key, that would be very difficult.
Not your keys, not your data, I guess. I don't know. I'm curious if you guys have looked into the role that using tokenization might play with complying with regulations like GDPR or do not track or things like that.
Yeah, I think complying with these regulations is going to take multifaceted approaches. I think tokenization is kind of an important part of an overall compliance strategy for a lot of these different compliance regimes. PCI specifically, for instance, has very specific kind of carve-outs for tokenization that you're able to use to kind of exempt a lot of your systems from PCI. And similarly, it kind of reduces the data burden for a lot of these other pieces of regulation and requirements that have some amount of data security or data privacy requirements. So as we kind of think about the technology going forward, it's definitely going to be kind of a trend, a major trend in data security, both in terms of being able to kind of reduce the risk of data loss, to restore data flexibility to organizations, but also to reduce the overall kind of cost and effort associated with compliance.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then to add to that, actually, if you think about compliance today, right, I mentioned GDPR, CCPA, the focus is really about consumers having control, right? And I'm a consumer, I would like to have control of my data, which means I want to be able to inquire who has my data for what purpose. If I want to delete it, I should be able to delete it, right? So as you implement tokenization, you want to be able to respond to consumer requests, to find the data, all the data relevant to that consumer, by leveraging so be able to detokenize or use the service to find Marko Ivanov within the database and then remove it if the consumer has requested, right? So that's a consideration as you apply the regulation to it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially given that by leveraging tokenization, that information's not sitting just blandly in someone's database, so there's more control. I know we're running very low on time, but I would love to hear what it's been like working together in deploying tokenization at TU, and in particular, such a large organization, working with a startup and with John.
So working with John has been great, but I'll tell you one thing. So at TransUnion, we have made, it's public information, we made an investment in Spring Labs, but we have taken the protocol internally, we plugged it in and we tested it for all those operational concerns we have, right? Is it fast enough? We tested the rotation of the key. We tested the security of the key. I think this key, and if I'm correct, it's literally I can put it across 4 different services, and to break it, I need to do it at the same exact time. Otherwise, it rotates and I can't do it. These are some extremely important concepts that we have tested, took it through paces, and verified actually you can use it and implement it. Now the next step is where do you implement it as your large organization? And there's 2 ways of doing it. You implement it internally for internal processes, right? Even if you're exchanging information between different parts of the organization. Or the second one, which is actually very appealing, is as we interact with our clients, as our clients are looking to minimize the flow of PII, can we use the same protocol to exchange information between us? So don't send the PII to us. Use the tokenization service, get a token to TransUnion. The tokens match. We don't even see the PII. We don't even know who we're providing data for, meaning what consumers, but we are pending it. It's depersonalized and send it back so that financial institution can build a model, right? So, then you keep a record of it, because you still can keep a record of what tokens are exchanged. So if you need to do audits, you can actually go back. Like, those are applications that you consider as you look to leverage the technology. And then the last one is, is create exchanges. I think there was a question about loan stacking in the previous session. We all know if the competitors share information with each other, they would prevent some of the loan stacking problems, some of the fraud problems. Leveraging tokenization technology can actually enable that, where competitors actually can share information while still remaining competitive and maintaining the privacy of the consumers.
Yeah, and based on your background, you've been focused on how to apply various technologies to data privacy over the course of your career. And given what you've seen on the commercial side with what tokenization can do, do you see this being adopted as a standard at some point, or incorporated in best practices?
Certainly, I would hope so. I really would hope so. It's relatively easy. It's simple to do, right? It's a small lift, and it really enhances the security. Because, as I said, no matter how religious you are in implementing your policies, in maintaining your vulnerability fixes, right, you still have a risk. And by minimizing the access to data, you're actually minimizing the risk even more.
Awesome. John, one more closing thought from you, or otherwise I think we need to wrap up.
Yeah, I know we're a little low on time here. Closing thought, it's been great working with the TU team as well. I really kind of see their efforts here and think of them as one of the most secure kind of credit bureaus kind of in the space, really thinking about kind of these cutting edge topics such as tokenization. And I think that the last parting thought here in about 5 seconds is with kind of the increase in the number of attacks and the increase in kind of AI making attacks easier, this problem is going to compound 10x over the next 5 years. So I think one quote that I'd like to kind of part with, I didn't come up with this, but I thought it was pretty appropriate, is basically, the data security AI kind of nuclear bomb has already gone off, and we've seen the flash, but we haven't felt the shockwave yet. So I think it's kind of incumbent on everyone in the room to figure out in the split second before the shockwave hits how we're going to adapt to it. And I think tokenization could be an important part of the solution.
Awesome. Thank you. My social security number thanks both of you.
Thank you.
Let's give them a hand, guys.